Welcome back to Solving Water, a Xylem podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Holloway, and I've got another great series to share with you. When you think of construction and mining, what kinds of words come to mind? Maybe diggers, dump trucks, coal are some common ones. But did you know that water plays a crucial role in the construction process? Water in these industries can either be a necessity or a nuisance. Either way, experts are needed to manage this water efficiently, effectively, and sustainably. Whether it's bypassing water to complete a construction project or dewatering an open pit mine operation, in this series, recorded live from CONEXPO in Las Vegas, I interview customers, distributors, and Xylem experts about all the ways we address water for these industries. Hope you enjoyed the show as much as I enjoyed the interviews. I'd like to welcome Mike Ivory to the show. He is the Director of Service Solutions and Business Development for Xylem. Welcome.
Hi.
You've been on the show once before.
That's correct.
One of the very first episodes. So, deep cuts. We're back here at a trade show. That one was WEFTEC, I think.
Yeah, it was WEFTEC. I don't remember what year it was, but it was a while ago.
I think 2019.
Okay.
So it's been a little minute since we've caught up, and there's been a lot of changes to your role over that period of time, and then also, just your experience with the company. So if you could just give our listeners a little bit of your background, that would be great.
Yeah, so, without going too deep into it, I've been with Xylem now for roughly 15 years. I started in an outside sales role, progressed through that role, took on a project management role, essentially supporting oil and gas fracking operations. It was a temporary assignment I did for 11 months. Once that was complete, I took on a role as the district manager of submersible sales, basically supporting the eastern half of the United States with our submersible pump solutions. And then since 2017, I was in the role of Northeast Regional Sales Manager. So responsibility for our entire breadth of product in the Northeast portion of the United States. And then just recently, within the last week or so, I got promoted to a new role, which is what you mentioned, Director, Service Solutions, Business Development, where I'm going to work with a lot of our niche businesses to try to grow that and see what we can do to help our customers in those markets. So one of my people that I'll be working with in that role specializes in mining, which I think is really relevant to the show we're doing here, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Before we get to that, though, I wanted to ask you about the services piece. So You're not the first person today that I've spoken with who has service solutions in their title.
Sure.
What's the driver behind really incorporating services into everything we do?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing, right, is if you look back, we've always been a services business, right? But we've never really called ourselves that. When you look at some of our competitors, they are selling and renting product, but they're not applying it. They're not out there day to day working hand in hand with their customers in the field to utilize and apply the products. So I think that's really where the separation and the designation of service solutions comes from, is the fact that, we are working hand in hand with our customers. We have boots on the ground, and we're helping them to complete their tasks. And I think that really gets at the heart of what the service solutions nomenclature is all about.
So then that's been kind of the thread that's run through a lot of my interviews here. I think services is, I agree wholeheartedly with what you said. And the more interviews I do, it reconfirms that for me.
Sure.
So we are here at CONEXPO, so I wanted to get back to this discussion about mining and construction, right? So I think CONEXPO, it makes sense, construction industry. It's also CONAG for aggregate. And as somebody who is pretty familiar with the business, I still had a hard time understanding what that was for a while. So I'm wondering if you could kind of help break down what the aggregate industry is. I know it often is confused a little bit with mining.
Yeah.
It is mining, but can you help the listeners understand?
Yeah, so I think you hit on it precisely, is there is definite confusion amongst people that aren't in the industry directly to the differences between mining and aggregate. And really it's synonymous, right? Aggregate is product that comes out of the ground, i.e. it needs to be mined, right? It just doesn't lay there on top of the ground and you scoop it up. So really when I think aggregate, I think mining. When I think mining, I think aggregate, coal, gold, cobalt, all this other stuff, right? But if you just think about aggregate, the only way to get it And when we're talking about aggregate, it's stone, right? The only way to get that stone out of the ground is to mine it out of the ground. And that could be a surface mine where you have an open pit that you're digging down into the ground and pulling product out. Or it could be an underground mine where you have essentially a hole that goes into the ground that the workers go into, and it's truly an underground mining situation. And in both of those cases, you're bringing out the same product, which is aggregate. It could be limestone, sandstone, whatever the product might be, but some type of stone from the ground to the surface.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. We're talking about stone and
Sure.
bringing it out of the ground, which is not something we specifically do at Xylem. So what is the role that we play in these industries?
Yeah, so I mean, there's the impact, I should say, of water in the aggregate industry is vast. I mean, the first thing that most people think about is water as a nuisance, right? And so we do a lot of work to handle that nuisance water, whether it be in an underground mining situation or in a surface mine. Typically, and especially when you're mining for limestone, there's vast gaps in the limestone deposits, and in those gaps is water. When you think limestone, you think water. And so as they dig, the customers dig to produce that product, they often encounter water that needs to be handled because it's essentially covering up more of their product. So we do a lot of water handling just to get nuisance water out of the way. And some of that water is a continual stream of water. So it's not just a static pocket of water that once you get rid of it, it's gone. It will continue to replenish itself. So that requires the need for our services to, one, pump that water down, and then two, maintain that low water level so that the customers can continue mining for their product. The other piece of it is what I like to call process water, right? And that could be water that's used for cooling, that could be water that's used for dust suppression on the surface or even in the mine, but basically using water for the process. And that's a little different scenario because when we're getting rid of nuisance water, it's typically large volumes that we need to get out of the way quickly. When we're dealing with processed water, it's typically smaller volumes of water at a higher pressure rating, and so that requires some different products that we have to offer as opposed to the products that we would use to cover the nuisance water. But essentially in every aspect of aggregate mining, water is making an impact, whether it's towards the process or detracting from their process, water's involved.
That's a great overview. One thing that stuck out to me, another thing I learned when I do these interviews, and I actually had a chance to visit quarry outside of Nashville last year.
Okay.
And so the importance of dust suppression and what that takes and why is it such a focus? I mean, for obvious reasons, it inhibits view, right? So like in terms of just being able to see what you're doing,
yeah,
and you have a lot of dust, that's not good. But are there other issues that can cause?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, dust is an air pollutant, right? And so when mines or quarries have dust issues, they're often approached by the EPA for the amount of dust that they're putting out. And if they can't control that dust, fines can be levied against them. And they're pretty hardy fines. So controlling that dust from an environmental protection side of things is probably more important than just, so I can see better out my windshield. Dust has negative effects on the air that we breathe, on the air that other living things breathe. So there's an importance to keeping that under control from, I don't want to necessarily say sustainability, but from a life cycle standpoint, it's just healthy.
Have you been involved in the construction and aggregate industries at Xylem for the duration of your career?
Yeah, from my entire career here, I've been involved in construction and aggregate.
Okay.
Yeah, yep.
So how have you seen, what are some of the changes you've seen over your time?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and I mean, I think you need to break that into two parts, right? The construction piece and the aggregate piece.
Okay.
So we'll just stay on aggregate for a minute, right? The changes that we've seen there are more around the efficient management of their water. And I'm talking about the nuisance water here at this point. So, 15 years ago when I started, you'd roll into a quarry and there would be, hundreds of pumps sitting around all over the place trying to maintain the water levels in that quarry so that customers get the product out. And they may be diesel-driven pumps, gasoline-driven pumps, electric-driven pumps, whatever pumps that seemed that they could get their hands on just to get their water out of the way, right? The money that is made there is on the product. So the cost at that time really wasn't looked at as long as they could get the water out of the way. The progression I've seen now with the quarries is that they want to more efficiently manage that water so that, one, they don't need 50 pumps to do it. They could do it with 2 or 3. And then 2, They want to do it in a more cost-effective manner so that they can improve their bottom lines. So, we've come in and been able to design pump systems when we're partnering with a company to say, okay, you have this nuisance water in all these locations. How do we get that to a singular spot or sump? And then from that sump, how can we employ a pumping system in here that's, one, not only efficient, but two, uses many less pumps to accomplish the same goal. So in often cases, we've taken quarries from a 30-pump dewatering system. When I say dewatering, I'm talking about getting water out of the way, to a 3 or 4 pump dewatering system, cut their operating costs in half or more. And then also by decreasing the number of pumps required to do that, you really take down maintenance costs, which things aren't really looked at like that. But when you can start talking to customers about what the maintenance of all these assets costs, it really gets astronomical. So when we can really hone that in, it makes a big difference. And then, the advent of switching from a lot of the diesel-driven pumps, which a lot of these quarries and mines were used to traditionally over the past 30, 40 years, to talking about the use of electric drive pumps, it really has a multitude of effects, right? One, you're decreasing carbon footprint, right? You don't have all these diesel engines out there just blaring away, putting exhaust into the atmosphere. Two, the cost of electricity is significantly lower right now than the cost of diesel fuel. And then the third part of it, and that goes to the maintenance piece, is with the electric pumps, the preventative maintenance of those units is significantly less than the preventative maintenance of a diesel unit, primarily because you don't have an engine to maintain, right? The electric motor takes very minimal maintenance, if any at all, a couple shots of grease every couple months, and it's good to go, as compared to oil and fuel filters and air filters every 10 days if you're running around the clock on a diesel engine. So you really decrease those costs overall by switching to electrically driven pumps. Now the trade-off is there's usually some upfront costs to get power into the location and enough power to run the pumps, but the payoff is pretty quick. Then going to look at the other thing, right, the construction industry, how has that changed? I would say it's changing similarly with a push towards electric-driven equipment, but that is somewhat opportunistic because, as you know, all construction sites aren't located beside, large sources of power, and that power isn't readily available. So we still have, the need for diesel-driven end suction pumps in a lot of construction applications. They still work really well, and I think we've done a good job as a company, making sure that we're using the best available technology out there to lower our emissions. We've actually started redesigning a lot of our signature pump models to use lower horsepower engines, which means less emissions, which means less fuel consumption. And the reason we've done that is just, we've looked back over the history of our products and said, okay, where are most of our customers running these units? So if you look at a 6-inch pump, for example, a standard CD150, one of our hallmark products, typically we had a 72, 74 horsepower engine on that pump. And when we look at the data, where most customers run that is around 40 horsepower. So over the last couple of years, we've taken 2 steps backwards in the engine size, and we're still getting the same performance out of the pump, and the customers are still satisfied. So we went from 72 to 64, and we went from 62 to 49 horsepower engines, and it's a significant cost savings both in the operating costs and the upfront cost to purchase that unit.
What are some of the applications that we support in construction?
Yeah, so we could talk about this for hours, right? If you break that down into, I guess it would be 2 or 3 main groups. One is sewer bypass, and right, that's where we cut our teeth in the rental business, and it's where we will continue to, I think, see the majority of our business. So anytime, sewer lines need replaced, or there's an upgrade at a wastewater treatment plant, and water needs to continue to flow, we can show up and pump that water around the work area, so that the contractors can continue doing the work that they need to do without having to worry about the sewage inflow. The second is general dewatering, right? And that's a really broad topic, but anytime people are going to be putting shovels into the ground, right, digging with excavators, and they're in an area where there's high water table. Think Florida, for example, right? You can't dig 3 feet into the ground in Florida without running into some sort of groundwater. So we offer a lot of solutions for groundwater management, whether that may be well point dewatering systems, submersible pumps, and drilled wells. We've got a lot of rotary lobe pumps now that we're using to do general dewatering, but basically we're making the site dry so that the contractor can work in the dry and not in the mud. So we do a lot of that. And then we've come along recently, I shouldn't say recently, but more recently, the opportunities that are rising for temporary fire pumping. And when you think about that, it's twofold. So in the initial construction basis, when we're going to go build a new building, right? the building's ready to go, except that you don't have a fire pump. So, we can't have occupancy without a fire suppression system in place. Well, we can rent you pumps to make up that need until your true fire pump comes in. So we've seen an uptick in business from that. And then we've got a lot of aged buildings, just like our infrastructure. We've got a lot of old buildings in the country. And, those fire pumps that were installed 50 years ago, they need to be replaced. And replacing them isn't just as easy as snapping your fingers and a new one shows up. There's long lead times on almost everything right now, right? So to order a new fire pump could be, months, if not longer. And so while that's going on, we can supply a temporary system and a temporary fire pump system to keep your building open. So we've been getting a lot out of that recently as well, too.
Wow. What about digital solutions? So I was talking to someone earlier today about just the old standard of, having a manned pump watch versus bringing in some of these remote monitoring capabilities. Are you seeing a shift in that it's becoming more common with the digital solutions?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I'm seeing it to the point where replacing a lot of manned pump watches with digital solutions, although I think that makes the most sense, right? And that's something that we need to do a better job of, is talking to our customers and ultimately their customers about the digital solution as opposed to the manned pump watch, because it's a big expense to have a man out on a job site. But what I do see is with our digital solutions, whether it be FST, which is our Field Smart technology that comes standard on all of our new Godwin dry primes now, or with our remote monitoring and control capabilities, which is essentially a PLC that networks a lot of pumps together and gives customers the ability to view that pump system. There is a peace of mind that customers are getting from that. When they go home at the end of the day, they can pull up on any web-enabled device the pump system and look at, is the pump running or not? What speed is it pumping at? What's the fuel levels? Are there any alarms on that pump? And they can feel comfortable that what's out there is performing as they would expect it. Additionally, we can set up any sorts of alarms or triggers. If this happens, then call this person and say, hey, you might want to take a look at things. So it is getting adopted, and I think it's the peace of mind, but it's also generational, right? Everybody knows that the baby boomers are starting to retire, and those people are being replaced by younger, less tenured employees that grew up with technology. And they use these type of technologies to monitor anything and monitor everything in their homes. You think of Ring doorbells and stuff like that. That's what this newer generation is used to, and I think it makes perfect sense to give them the capability to do what they're comfortable doing rather than to force them to do things the way things used to be done. So it's been a journey for me. I've learned a lot through it. And I think it makes good sense to equip your pumping system with the capability to monitor it. Yeah, it just makes good sense.
Yeah, and I think it's, to your earlier point about services, it's just another arrow in the quiver, right?
Sure.
So the ability to check pump status and even make some decisions depending on what's happening from a remote location is just another way we can help service and support.
Well, yeah, and I mean, the other thing is that, there's a plethora of data that we can collect by doing this, right? So, if a customer wants to see what were my flow rates for the day, what were my instantaneous flow rates, how much water was I moving? When did the pumps experience, high temperature? You name it, there's a way that we can monitor it. And we have a great controls engineering team to work with to design a monitoring system, if it's different than our standard, right? That will give the data that customers want to see, whatever that data may be. It just takes a little, cooperation with the customer to identify those metrics that they want to be able to read out on, and then design a system that will report that to them. But it allows them then to take that data and make intelligent business decisions going forward.
Yeah, that's also very true. This has been really insightful. I really appreciate it. I mean, I'm on the rental and services team in the marketing group, and I even learned a lot of stuff today.
Sure.
So appreciate that. One more question for you.
Yeah.
What is the most important thing you've learned in the water business so far?
That's a tough question. I was talking about this, might have been yesterday with someone. I think it's probably the fragility of the world's water, right? It's something that we take for granted. And, I'm from the northeast part of the country, and water is abundant. Rarely is there drought conditions where I'm at, right? And so I think that I definitely have taken it and probably still take it for granted to a certain degree. But I mean, even we're out here in Las Vegas right now, right? And flying in here, I flew right over Lake Mead and the Hoover Dam and looked down, and you can see how low the water is. And driving over here in the Uber, I was talking to the Uber driver about it. I said, well, hopefully, with the snow that California's getting in the rain and everything, that might help you. And he said, well, yeah, it might, because they won't be pulling as much from our water sources. So we may be able to see that those levels come up. Now, whether that's accurate or not, I'm not one to specify that. But when you just look at that one example of Lake Mead and how low it is right now, and think, my goodness, how much lower is it going to go? And then, when is Las Vegas going to run out of water, right? So I think we as a people don't do a good enough job of looking at how critical water is worldwide, as opposed to, when we flush our own toilets or turn on our own faucets and it's there, right? Not everybody has that luxury, and I think we really need to be thinking about that and working to manage that water more effectively, so that future generations aren't high and dry, so to speak.
That's great. Thank you so much for being here, and for talking us through everything, and hopefully you'll come back again. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this installment of Solving Water, a Xylem podcast. Also, a big thank you to our guests who took the time to chat with me and share their experiences with us. Once again, I learned something new that continues to shape my view of the importance of water in the world. Please check each episode's show notes for links to additional information and my email address, or find me, Amanda Holloway, on LinkedIn for questions, feedback, or to be a guest on the show. Solving Water is available everywhere you get your podcasts. Stream, download, and subscribe now.